right, today we're going to talk about fall seeded annuals for spring bloom. These are plants that we plant in the fall and then they're dormant through the whole winter. They look completely dead, but then in the spring they bloom about 3 to 4 weeks earlier than if we had planted those same blooms in the spring. It's very cool, kind of a magic trick. You don't need these fancy greenhouses to do this. When I started growing, I had no idea if it would work or not. We experimented a lot of different ways. And what we found is that so long as you use the right kinds of plants for fall planting, you really can't go wrong. So I'm going to show you how we do it and how this can be applied in your backyard. I'm going to walk between these two beds. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on here, but I'll explain in a minute. For those of us who are growing in containers or in cut flower gardens, we always want blooms as early as possible in the spring because that's the time when we're really craving flowers after a whole winter of nothing, right? So having these fall planted flowers that are going to bloom early is so much fun because you know they're going to come first and it's just such a lovely thing to look forward to. These are our fall planted annuals. They were sown in early to mid-August. We're in zone 7A here in Whitehall, Maryland, so you kind of have to calibrate these seeding dates based on what your zone is. These are Sweet William, also known as Dianthus, and they make a beautiful spring filler. They smell really good. They're also edible, and they're related to carnations. We love planting them outside in the field because they're really hardy and we know they're going to survive through the winter. So you can see that they don't look awesome, and that's because it's wintertime and they're not supposed to look awesome. So I think lesson number one for any home gardeners who are trying this is to not freak out when the plants don't look very good. So these are the Sweet William on my right. On my left here, we have a bed of perennials that we planted in the fall. We planted them a little late, around late October, and really the most ideal timing for planting all of these things is more like early October. So late October was pushing it, but we really wanted to get them in the ground. This is Caryopteris or Caryopteris. I never know how to say it. It sounds like a dinosaur name. You can see that it looks terrible. Does not look good. But I know it's alive because I can see a little green on here, and if I snapped one of these branches, it would probably look a little green on the inside. So I wanted to make sure that these survive through the winter, which is why we're going to put Rime on them to help overwinter them in dormancy for spring bloom. So now we're going to talk about overwintering. It's actually not that hard. You can just literally do this and walk away and not look at it again until spring. You don't have to do anything else. Just plant the plants in the ground. You can use weed fabric. You don't have to, whatever you want. And then come back in the spring and check it out. If you use the right kind of plants, and we'll put a list of the plants that we overwinter in the notes here, then you should be fine and it should be no problem. That said, often we'll use a fabric for frost protection, which is called Rime over here, just to make sure that things survive. This is an extra step you don't have to do, but for a gardener, it's so easy. These tools are not expensive, so I'll just show you exactly how we do it. So what we do is we pull the frost cloth over our crops. We don't use hoops to hold the frost cloth up at all. We just put it right on the ground. I know this sometimes shocks people who've done this a lot in their gardens, but I'll tell you why. The reason we want to use no hoops at all and just put the Rime right on the ground is because in the winter we tend to get a lot of wind around here, and we found that if we have hoops under the Rime, the wind more easily catches it and lifts it up, and it's so annoying to come out in 20-degree weather and put it back. It just like drives me crazy. So we just don't do it. We put the Rime right on the ground, right on top of the plants. Come here, buddy. Then we use something heavy to pin down the Rime. We use rock bags, but you can use anything heavy you have lying around. Could be pieces of lumber, could be containers filled with soil that you're going to plant in the spring, whatever you want. You just want to make sure it's pinned down enough that it's not going to blow up when the wind comes. Now, one thing to know is that this blanket is going to be covered in frost come spring, usually in February and early March, for example, and it's going to feel rock hard, and you're going to be really worried about the seedlings underneath. In fact, it's a little hard now from the frost we had last night. But the thing about this Rime is it may get really frosty, and yes, it may pinch out, kind of kill the very tips of the plants that are touching the Rime. But in a lot of cases, you kind of want that pinch. So for example, on our Dianthus, when our Dianthus gets pinched, or when the tips die off, that actually helps the dianthus bloom in branching stems so that we can have a lot of cuts per plant. So we never really mind when our plants get pinched by a frost-covered rime. It's no big deal. In fact, it's kind of preferred. The other thing is, when it snows, a lot of people will pull their rime up and just let the snow blanket the ground because snow is actually insulating. We don't do that. We're pretty low key around here, as you can tell. I just don't want to deal with it. So we leave this down all winter, whether it's snowing, whether it's frost, what have you. The only weather element that you really need to worry about, as I said, is wind. You just want to make sure that you pin this down enough. You can see how many rock bags we put around the edges of ours here. At our last farm, this would not have been enough rock bags because it was much windier. We needed rock bags about every 3 feet. Here we can get away with more like every 10 feet. I went ahead and uncovered some yarrow that we planted in the fall for spring bloom. These are moonshine yarrow. They're actually a perennial, somewhat short-lived sometimes, depending on where we planted them and how well we took care of them. But I like to overwinter them under rime so that they fully survive really well and approach the spring super strong. So if you came up close here, you'd see that a lot of these plants have dead leaves. Again, nothing to worry about. And if there's one message I can leave you to take away is that you don't need to worry too much when plants look dead in the winter because that's what they're supposed to look like. As long as they have just a little bit of green at the center, you're good to go. Now in the spring, I would come over here and uncover the rime like I just did and check it out. And by spring in our zone, I mean like early April. April's a time when we typically in Maryland get some nights that are in the 20s, maybe just a few, and that can be really scary for our fall planted annuals because we've just tenderly cared for them so much through the winter under this rime. We just really want everything to look good in the spring. So when it gets down to 20, the plants are a lot bigger and they have a lot more tender growth that can be killed by frosts. So spring is the time when I might get a little more fiddly and use these hoops over the plants. You can buy these or you can make them out of just materials from your hardware store. They're really easy to put in. They're not very large. That's why I like using these like little ones. So what we would do is we'd put these hoops all the way down the bed and then we'd pull the rime over the hoops so that the rime then doesn't touch the plants, because this is a point at which we don't want any of the plants to get frosted because they've just got too much tender growth. So it's okay if the plants get frosted through the winter, but in the spring when they start to get big around April, you really want to keep this rime off the plants during cold, cold nights. So that's really all there is to it. Now, like I said, you don't have to use this frost cloth. You can just let everything be with nothing on top through the whole winter and see what happens. We actually do that for quite a few plants. Bachelor's buttons, agrostemma, larkspur, blue pleurum are all examples of plants that don't really need rime, but there are some that we just care about more because they're more expensive to buy, or we just really, really love them and we really, really want them. Like, that's how I feel about this moonshine yarrow. So it's up to you how fiddly you want to get, but you don't have to go crazy if you don't want to. That's the joy of gardening. You can do it your way and likely it'll work out great.